The old dog's named Lucky, and everybody likes the old dog, and Lucky loves all of them. And so he was talking to the neighbors down at the beach yesterday, and you know, it's a funny thing. They was talking about the Constitution. You know, you'd be surprised what wisdom can pass between a man and a dog. But anyway, that's what was going on there. I listened intently. One of them neighbors was a craggy-faced, weathered, beaten-looking old ex-Marine standing there, and he said, Mr. Pollard, he said, you know, when we all went into the Marine Corps and the Army and the Air Force and the Navy and all that, he said, we swore an oath to the Constitution. Whoever's on the side of the Constitution is the same side that the military is going to be on. So somebody needs to think about this awful hard, because it could be us. Somebody needs to think about this. Speaking of the Constitution, in 1780-something, when they were writing the Constitution, there were two parties. There was the Whigs and there was the Democrats. Now the Whigs, they wanted a king. In fact, they wanted the British king. They lost the war. The Democrats wanted democracy. Well, the founders of the country didn't want a democracy because they knew the history of democracy. If you go back far enough, the Spartans were a republic and they had a king, but he had to follow the laws of the land. The Greeks were Democrats, and they were wishy-washy. Every time the Greek people wanted something a little different, they thought they got it. They thought they could predict the future by what they were thinking. The Spartans knew they could predict the future by what was the past. Well, the Spartans and the Greeks went to war. The Spartans pulled one over on them and beat them, because the Spartans knew the past, and as a result they knew the future. The Greeks didn't know the past, so they didn't know the future. So the Spartans knew what was going to happen. Well, that was the first time, I think, that there was a democracy. The Romans thought it was a pretty good idea, so they give it a try. Well, in about 50 years, Caesar had turned into a dictator. And he just gave the rabble, the voters, what they wanted, and which was bloodbaths in the Colosseum. And for that they gave him all the power he could stand, and he took full advantage of them. And they lasted about 400 years like that, and finally the country was defeated. So that was the second defeat of democracy. Now our founders knew history, and they knew that was the history of democracy. It had been tried quite a few times in Europe and failed, and they wanted no part of it. What they wanted was a republic. The people will vote for their elected officials, but the elected officials will have to follow the laws of the republic. And they wrote up a constitution, and it was approved by all of the states. You know, the states, they wanted an electoral vote. They didn't want a popular vote because the states were all different sizes. The states in those days were not states as we think of as states. Germany was a state. France was a state. Spain was a state. England was a state. The states were countries. Our states were also separate countries, and there was 13 of them. They had been colonies, but now they were countries. They were states. And 13 of them got together and wrote a constitution, created a federal government, which was a place for all the states to get together and send their representatives to, and for the people to send their representatives to, and they could all get together and vote on things. Well, we've changed that. The Senate was created to represent the state governments. The House was created to represent the people, and the president was created to run the country. Now we want to change that. We have a president who's running the country. If he ain't doing nothing else, he's running the country. And the Democrats don't like it because he's not running the country to suit them. Well, here in the state of Virginia, Washington has spread its bedrooms all over northern Virginia and big parts of Maryland. So now Washington, D.C. voters are running Maryland. Washington, D.C. voters are now running Virginia. We just elected a Democratic governor, majority in the State House. Now, you have to wonder if the states are not going to want to pull out of this deal because they're no longer represented as they were at one time. And we have a governor now who wants to do away with parts of the Second Amendment, which was created to satisfy the Declaration of Independence that said that Americans are free men. They had the right to overthrow the government. More than that, they had the duty to overthrow the government if it became corrupt. Well, considering what we were supposed to be, I'd say we're getting pretty close to being corrupt. Donald Trump went into the White House talking about clearing the swamp. Well, you know that the District of Columbia was built on a swamp, and that was not what he's talking about. He's talking about the government that is full of Democrats. There's almost nobody in government offices that isn't a Democrat. Republicans in government, other than the presidency and some in the House of Representatives and some in the Senate, almost the whole government is Democrats. And I know it because they have all moved out here into Virginia, and they're now running Virginia. Washington, D.C. now is running Virginia, and it's doing it through its Democrat Washington employees living out here in the counties. There are 90 counties in Virginia, and about 6 of them Democrat, come out of Washington and a few other places. But other than that, we're a Republican state. But we are now overrun by Washington Democrats. So now we're talking about gun laws. We want to change the length of time that the governor can be governor from 4 years to 8 years, and on in order to centralize power in the northern part of the state where all the Democrats are. There's trouble coming over this. The governor knows it too. He's declared a state of emergency. They're putting fences up all around the State House and the grounds around it and putting up signs on the streets, no guns allowed. No guns allowed? You mean Americans are not allowed to carry guns in Richmond? What? That's the damnedest thing I ever heard of. Well, there's going to be a price paid for that. This is all going to come back to haunt the Democrats. All right, we're going to see what happens. There's going to be I think a vote on Monday, but I know there's going to be a demonstration. And a local policeman told me that there'll be 100,000 people there demonstrating, and it might be 200,000. He said, we police are not going to knock ourselves out or get hurt in order to protect the Democratic government because they don't represent Virginia or the Constitution. So it may very well be there may not be too many people arrested. About 1940, I was probably 6 years old or 7. Maybe it was 41. Anyway, President Roosevelt at that time was very popular. We were on our way back from a depression. There was war coming. President Roosevelt had filled the government up with Democrats because it had greatly expanded anticipation of war and needing to govern and control all of that. Well, he passed a law that said that an incoming president could not replace the government employees because there was war coming and he couldn't do that in the middle of a war. Well, the American people went along with that, and then at the end of the war, when he died, they put through, in the next election, they put through a law to make that permanent. So, the swamp is full of Democrats and has been since 1945 or something. That's why we're now calling it the swamp. People have been in there, families have been in there, their children, their grandchildren, have been in there working, and they're all loyal to the people that keep them in there and keep the government big so that they can all have jobs. That's why it's called a swamp. I guess that's about all I'm going to say on this. I could talk all day, but I don't think anybody wants to listen that long.